The screen on my phone says negative $14,200. Not zero, below zero. I'm sitting inside a Jollibee on Cologne Street in Cebu City, Philippines, on a Tuesday afternoon, and I just ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, one piece of fried chicken and a cup of rice. Not because I'm a tourist who thinks it's charming, but because it is the most food I can get for the least money, and I have been doing that math every single day for months. I'm 71 years old. My Philippine bank account shows a balance of 0 pesos. My American account is $14,200 in the hole. Social Security hits in 3 days, and the moment it does, $1,200 of it gets automatically swept out to cover the minimum payments on 2 credit cards I opened in 2022 when I ran out of options. I have no house. I have no retirement fund. I have no return ticket. I have a ceiling fan, a shared bathroom down the hall, and a window that faces a concrete wall. My name is Gary Hollis, and 34 years ago I started work on the floor of a Whirlpool factory in Clyde, Ohio, eating lunch from a thermos and putting money away every single paycheck because I genuinely believed, that discipline was the same thing as a plan. I arrived in this country in 2019 with $178,000 in liquid savings, $2,300 a month in guaranteed income, and what I told myself was just a need for a change of scenery. 4 years and 8 months later, I am below zero, and I am going to sit here and tell you exactly how that happened. Not because I want your sympathy, I don't, but because somewhere out there is another man like me, retired, alone, capable, still sharp, and quietly terrified that the rest of his life is going to be an empty room. I need that man to hear this before he boards the plane. I started at Whirlpool at 22 years old, and I retired at 64. And in between those 2 dates, I showed up every single day, ate lunch from a thermos, drove used trucks, and put money away like a man who believed that discipline was its own kind of love, which is a beautiful idea right up until you realize you applied it to a savings account instead of to the people standing next to you. Linda left in 1998. She told me the factory always came first. She wasn't wrong. Derek was 8 years old when she filed, and the honest truth is that I processed the divorce the same way I processed a shift schedule change. Adjusted, adapted, moved on. That's not strength. That's damage wearing the costume of strength. I met Paulette at a church potluck in 2009, a widow, patient, kind, the kind of woman who deserved a man who knew how to be present. We lived together 6 years in the house on Buckeye Street before she sat across from me at the kitchen table one evening and said, quietly, that she felt like she was living with a ghost. She wasn't cruel about it. That almost made it worse. After she left, I was in that 3-bedroom house alone with a Dish Network subscription and a freezer full of microwave lasagna, and I told myself I was fine. I watched cable news until 2 in the morning. I fixed things around the house that didn't need fixing just to have something to do with my hands. My son Derek called on Christmas and on my birthday when he remembered. I kept the calls short because I didn't know how to fill the silence, and I was too proud to admit I was counting the hours between one week and the next. By 2017, retirement arrived, and it felt less like arrival and more like a door closing behind me. I was 64 years old, still strong, still sharp, still capable of solving problems, and there was simply nothing left that needed solving. That is when I found the YouTube channels. Men like me, gray-haired, practical, done with Ohio winters and American silence, sitting on balconies in Cebu or Chiang Mai, talking about how much their life had opened up. I watched hundreds of hours of those videos. I told myself I was doing research. What I was actually doing was looking for permission to believe that the last chapter didn't have to be an empty room. I didn't call it loneliness. I called it being ready for a change. That distinction cost me everything. I arrived in Cebu City in July 2019 with a rolling suitcase, a carry-on bag, and the kind of careful optimism a man builds over 6 months of YouTube research. And for the first 4 weeks I was disciplined. I ate at local spots, I walked the malls, I joined an online forum for American retirees, and told myself this was practical networking and not loneliness wearing a different shirt. The meetup was on a Saturday evening at a bar on Mango Avenue. A dozen expats and their Filipino friends drinking San Miguel around plastic tables, and a man named Domingo, someone's local contact, pulled up a chair and sat his cousin down next to me. Her name was Marisol, Mari. She was 26 years old and she was not working that night, not looking, not positioned. She was just there. I held on to that detail for a long time afterward like it meant something. I am not sure anymore that it does. What I know is that she was 26 and I was 66, and when she laughed at something I said, not the soft, practiced laugh of a woman managing a situation, but something that came up fast and surprised her. I felt something I had not felt in a very long time, which was the sensation of being seen by another human being. That is a dangerous thing to feel when you have been invisible for years. She remembered on the third time we met for coffee that I took it black with 1 sugar. That is all it took. Understand that. 1 sugar. After 2 marriages and 40 years of being the man who showed up but never arrived, someone remembered how I took my coffee, and I was gone. By September, when my back locked up from an old electrician's injury, she came to my apartment every evening for 2 weeks without being asked. Not because I called her, but because she asked and I said I was fine and she came anyway. She brought food from the Turo Turo on the corner. She sat with me while I ate. She did not ask for a single thing during those 2 weeks, not one thing. I would later understand that those 2 weeks of asking for nothing were the most calculated investment she ever made, because by the time the first real ask arrived in November, 4 months in, when she told me quietly and without looking at me that her mother had missed 2 dialysis sessions because the family couldn't cover the bill, the arrears sitting at $880. By that point, I was not a man making a financial decision. I was a retired electrician from Clyde, Ohio, who had spent 34 years fixing things for a company and had nothing left to fix. And here, finally, was a problem with a solution and a woman who needed me to find it. I paid it before she finished the sentence. What I felt was not generosity. It was not even love, not exactly. It was purpose. It was the specific physical relief of mattering again. That feeling is a drug, and I had just taken my first hit. After I paid that $880 dialysis bill, something shifted in my chest. Not guilt, not doubt. Relief. Pure physical relief. The kind a man feels when his hands finally have something to hold. January 2020, I moved Mari into the apartment and upgraded to a bigger unit in La Hougue for $490 a month because she needed space, I told myself, because that was the practical thing, the responsible thing. And I was good at practical and responsible. I had 34 years of evidence. Then February came, and I sat across from her at the kitchen table while she explained the dialysis schedule. 3 sessions a week, $110 a session, $1,320 a month. And I nodded, and I said I'd cover it. And I told myself I was not paying for a woman. I was investing in a family. I was building something. And that distinction felt very important to me at the time. Over the next 36 months, Lourdes's dialysis alone pulled $47,520 out of my savings, and I tracked it the same way I used to track overtime hours, methodically, without emotion, because emotion would have required me to ask a question I wasn't ready to answer. March 2020, the world shut down and Mari became the only human being who physically occupied the same space as me. And I was 67 years old, and I want you to understand what that does to a man's judgment. It doesn't cloud it, it dissolves it. It removes the floor entirely. And by August, I had wired $1,800 to the University of San Carlos for Renz's first year of engineering school. Because the boy had potential, I said. Because education is never wasted, I said. And I paid it again in 2021 and again in 2022, $5,400 total. And every time I wired the money, I felt like a man who had built something with his hands. October 2020, $7,200 for 2 motorized tricycles to start a family transport business. A real business, a sustainable income stream. I was not just giving money away, I was creating infrastructure. And 5 months later, a typhoon took both vehicles, and there was no insurance, and no one mentioned returning the money. And I did not ask, because asking would have meant naming what was actually happening, and I was not ready to name it. By March 2021, I had run the numbers enough times in my head to convince myself that the next step was logical. You build equity, you build a home, you build a future. And I wired $34,000 in 3 tranches to a contractor I had never met, for a concrete house on land I would never own, in a municipality called Lilone, built in Lourdes's name because that was how it worked here, because I trusted the process, because Mari had never once given me a reason not to trust her, and I needed that sentence to stay true more than I needed a contract. Then June 2021 through the end of 2022, $900 a month across 19 months. A brother's medical bill here, B's school fees there, a barangay permit, a motorbike repair, an emergency that was always real and always urgent and always mine to solve. $17,100 bleeding out in increments small enough that I never stopped to add them up, because adding them up would have forced me to see the number, and the number was the thing I was most afraid of. By the time 2023 arrived, I had spent $113,000 from savings in 3 years and 4 months, and I still had $65,000 left, and $2,300 a month coming in, and I told myself, I genuinely told myself, that I was ahead. Desperation makes you stupid, and loneliness makes you blind. I had both, and I handed her the keys to everything. It was a Sunday morning in February 2023, and my phone was dead, and I picked up hers from the nightstand to check the time, and the screen was already on, already lit, already open to a line thread with a contact name I couldn't read, just a row of emoji. And I read it the way you read anything that is already in front of your face, without deciding to. And the message at the top was time-stamped 2:14 a.m., and it said in plain English, "Don't worry about the old one, he is stupid. When the house is ready, I will fix the papers and we go." The profile photo was a man I had never seen, Filipino, mid-30s, wearing a hard hat at what looked like a construction site. I put the phone down. I sat on the edge of the bed. I did not wake her. I sat there for 47 minutes, and I did the only thing a man like me knows how to do, which is run the numbers. $34,000 for the house, her mother's name on the deed, no contract, no document with my signature that meant anything. And I already knew, before I said a single word, that the money was gone. I already knew. When I finally showed her the screen, she didn't flinch. She looked at me for a long moment the way a person looks at something they have been expecting, and then she said, flat and quiet, "Gary, I was always honest with you about what I needed. You chose to hear something else." That was it. No tears, no denial, no performance. Just that sentence, delivered like a clause in a contract she had already read and I had signed without reading. And the worst part, the part that has lived in my chest every day since, is that she wasn't wrong. She packed over 2 days. She took her things in bags, orderly, efficient, the way someone moves who has thought about moving for a long time. She did not return the key. The house in Lilone, the house I wired $34,000 to build on her mother's land in her mother's name, that house is still standing. Her family lives in it. I consulted a local attorney 2 weeks later, and he told me, gently, that recovering property through Philippine courts without a deed, without a contract, without my name on any document, would cost more in legal fees than the house was worth, and would take between 4 and 7 years. And I thanked him, and I walked out into the heat, and I stood on the sidewalk, And I thought about the fact that I had known this. I had known, in the part of my brain that never stops doing math, and I had chosen not to know it, because knowing it would have meant admitting what I was actually doing, which was not building a future, but buying proof that someone would notice if I disappeared. So here is the number, not the story, the number. Starting savings, $178,400. Total savings depleted, $178,400. Credit card debt opened in desperation in 2022 and 2023, $22,800. Personal loan from my son Derek, a man I barely know how to talk to, that I have not paid back and may never be able to, $8,000. Net financial destruction, $209,200. 4 years and 8 months. That is the bill. That is what I paid to feel like I mattered to one person on this earth. I am sitting in this Jollibee on Colon Street and the chicken is getting cold, and I am not going to pretend I was deceived, because the math was always there and I chose not to do it. And the man who spent 34 years tracking every overtime hour and every dollar in a 401k knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it anyway, because the alternative was going back to that 3-bedroom house on Buckeye Street and admitting that discipline and love are not the same thing, and he had only ever learned one of them. I wasn't paying for her love. I was paying for the feeling that I still mattered to someone on this earth. That's the most expensive thing a man can buy, and the price is always everything he has. The house I built is still standing. Her family lives in it. I pass the street sometimes on the way to the immigration office. That's the part nobody's YouTube channel tells you about. So if you are the man I am talking to, and you know if you are sitting somewhere in Ohio or Georgia or wherever, watching videos about Cebu City and Chiang Mai, and telling yourself you are just ready for a change, I need you to stop right now and say the actual word, not change. Loneliness. Say it out loud. Because desperation makes you stupid, and loneliness makes you blind, and I had both, and I handed her the keys to everything. And no warm climate, no younger woman, no family you finance into needing you is going to fix the thing that is actually broken, which is that you have not yet learned how to be enough company for yourself. Fix that first. Fix it before you buy the plane ticket. Fix it before you upgrade the apartment. Fix it before you pay the first bill that isn't yours to pay. I am 71 years old and I am learning it now, one plate of rice at a time, and I would give anything, to have learned it at 64. If this hit you somewhere real, leave a comment below. Tell me where you are in this story. Subscribe if you want to hear what comes next, because I am still here, I am still thinking, and I am not done yet.